You're watching Let the Quran Speak, and now we answer your questions. If you have a question, visit our website, QuranSpeaks.com. Dr. Shabir, the question is, when reading the Quran, how do we know if a verse was addressing a particular historical moment or giving guidance for all times?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The scholars of the exegesis of the Quran, commentary on the Quran, they try to demarcate the difference between the two. Often they looked for stories, narratives that show the historical context. If something was said, why was it said, in reference to whom, for example. Some of that information is not reliable. In fact, a lot of it is not reliable. People just imagined later on. They're reading the Quran and people imagine the scenario in which a verse like this might have been said.
So you mean like the occasions of revelation?
What are called occasions of revelation, yes. Now, in principle, that's a valid point that we should know the circumstances of the revelation. As Ibn Taymiyyah put it, you cannot understand the effect until you understand the cause. Like, what is the cause of this effect? So if the verses of the Quran are the effect of what was happening on the ground, what was the cause of what was actually happening on the ground? In other words, what we talk about when we speak of historical context, which is very natural. So sometimes the Quran is clearly referring to something that happens on the ground or is happening at the time or has happened. For example, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Have you not seen how your Lord dealt with the owners of the elephant? It's referring to something that people now would have to be curious to go back to the history of and find out what really happened, and then you get the lesson unfolding. And knowing the story helps you to understand what this surah is telling you about. Sometimes the name of a person is mentioned. فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٌ مِنْهَا وَطَرًا. When Zayd had, obtained what he desired from his wife. So it's referring to somebody named Zayd. So we need to know who is this Zayd and what happened with his marriage and so on. So this becomes a matter of curiosity. And then the stories start to, blossom about this. People tell each other, people imagine things, and what they imagined eventually are reported to as fact. Sometimes there is no obvious incident needed, but people came up with stories anyhow. So we have to be watchful of that. We gather all of that information. In fact, the information is gathered for us already in the massive commentaries on the Quran. But for our own study on a particular question, we might want to gather or cull from these massive commentaries the relevant information, sift them all, examine them carefully, and not be too bogged down with them, because we need to examine them themselves for their own historical context. Like, what were the motivations in history that led people to come up with these stories? So that's another line of inquiry, right? It's another question of sabab wurud hadhihi riwayat, right? The causes that led to the occurrence of these narratives. Or even their development or even invention in some cases.
So that sounds very complicated, Dr. Shabir, for the average reader, like somebody picking up, every Muslim reads the Quran, hopefully. How do they interpret it? How do they figure out, does this really apply for my time? Is it specific to a particular context?
Yes. That leads me to the flip side of this whole question. The flip side is that actually the Quran has a quite universalizing tendency. Think about the way that many verses of the Quran end by saying something about one of the attributes of God. Like, for example, Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. Certainly God knows all things. So, something is being told, and then this universalizing statement. Now, that statement does not require any particular circumstance. It's just for you to know that regardless of whatever is happening, God knows all things, right? And it's not only God's knowledge, God's power, God's ability, God being there for you, God being with the muhsinin, the good people, and so on. So the average person can read through the Quran and not be bothered by many of these circumstances of revelation. It's only when you want to go deeper, for scholarly exegesis, that you need to know the circumstances.
Yeah, and also like the legal pronouncements, like the things that you should be doing, right? Because the Quran has a lot of, like, the Day of Judgment and, things like that is included in the Quran, which is easy to understand. But then there are the other parts where you need to think, okay, how do I apply this in my life, practically speaking?
Yes.
And that's when you need to know if it is actually contextual or it applies to all times, right?
Yeah. And even there you will find, there are things which individuals have to apply in their daily lives. And there are matters which, the state will apply. So at the state level, naturally, you have scholars who are either employed with the state or closely affiliated with the state, or nonetheless, it will be the responsibility of heads of state to seek out the legal experts who are going to give the details. But when it comes to the individual practices, you will find that much of this is already like detailed in the Quran, or put in the Quran in such a way that you don't necessarily need to know the historical background behind them. For example, if it comes to fasting, like kulu washrabu hatta yatabayyana lakum al-khayt al-abyad min al-khayt al-aswad min al-fajr. Eat and drink until the black thread becomes distinct from the white thread of dawn. Thumma atimmu siyama ila al-layl. And then you observe, fasting until nightfall.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very simple. Give charity. That's easy. Give charity. No specific amount is being prescribed in the Quran, and probably this is how it was meant to be. Like, as a general rule, you give charity as much as you're able and as much as the situation demands, and so on. And then the legal scholars come to fix it later on based on narratives that are outside of the Quran. But reading the Quran, you're not puzzled by what is said there. You may want to know more, and you can find out more, but the text itself is not puzzling because you don't know the historical background.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if you get some simple commentary on the Quran, if there is something that really depends on the historical knowledge, then this might be pointed out in a footnote or in a commentary, on the side of the page or down below in the footnote area of the page.
Thank you for that explanation, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiya and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.